All right. Good evening, everyone. It is October 6th. It is 6:01. This is the Citizen Advisory Committee Exec Team meeting. I am Becky McCabe, School Board member.
Jillian Barker, School Board member.
We have our exec team here, as well as Dr. Pearson, Carol Smith, Lynn Schwartz is here, and we have guests from our architectural firm, and we'll be talking tonight about the facilities plan. Before we begin, we have some citizen comments, I understand.
Okay, let me go ahead and read our public comment introduction. The school board provides for a public comment period at each board meeting, subject to reasonable constraints. The practice of this board is to limit public comment to 3 minutes per speaker to a total of 30 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers addressing the board are expected to maintain a reasonable level of civility. Also, personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. Comments regarding individuals should be respectful. Insults and defamatory remarks have no place in this setting. The board will terminate public comment if speakers cannot adhere to these guidelines. Please identify yourself at the beginning of your remarks.
Dave, if you could play the citizens' comments.
Hello, my name is Danielle Penman. I am a parent, community member, and taxpayer in District 303. The CAC committee members currently represent less than 1% of the public body to which D303 serves. There are taxpayers who do not even know that this facility studies was conducted because they don't have children in the school district. There needs to be more public input on where tax dollars are spent. The focus for the last decade has been on construction, and this has led to great academic disparities across the district at all levels, K through 12. The COVID pandemic has clearly shown we are way behind on technology innovation for teachers and for students. There should be a detailed report explaining the facility study findings and what the consulting company recommendations are. The facility plan presentation provided by the district clearly shows what administrators value and what they want. What does the taxpayer, community member, parent, and student want? There should be town hall meetings, open public forums, and surveys should be sent out to get real public opinion and input from the majority of the public body, not just the few handpicked CAC members. There will be big decisions made for the majority by a minority. The current discussion and decision-making process poses many concerns. Time and adequate input from all stakeholders should be obtained. This should not be a rushed decision. It took 18 months to get the studies completed. It should take all the necessary time needed to establish a well-thought-out and comprehensive plan that will help our district improve the quality education that our students deserve. Thank you.
Michelle Casile. My comments are about the facility master plan. This is another big financial decision right before a school board election. What is the rush? Getting it done correctly should be the focus. The board has tax dollars to spend on facilities and academics, but very few people in the community know about this discussion, focus groups, or how and why money will be spent. Meanwhile, we are in the middle of a year like no other, with many distracted community members. Here are my questions. Where's the conversation about the fund balance? What is the total fund balance, and how much do you have to spend on these facility plan recommendations? Is it $20 million, $40 million? What is it this time? Please have a conversation about the fund balance at business services. Another set of questions. Where is the conversation about K-12 educational gaps and the action plan to fix the pre- and post-COVID academic issues? Pre-COVID, we had academic disparity at the elementary schools and we're in academic decline at the high school. When is that discussion happening? Please have a discussion about student academic needs and a plan at learning and teaching. The board should want to do this right and not quickly get facility recommendations approved before the school board election. The board should meet to discuss and review the administration's recommendation in relation to the charge priorities laid out when you hired the architects. This should happen before asking less than 1% of the public, which is the CAC, to be a focus group for administration's recommendations on facilities. Thank you for your time.
That concludes the comments.
Thank you. So tonight we are going to, we wanted to run by the exec team the process that the board has discussed with Bold Architects. And so Dr. Pearson, could I ask you to do the introductions, and we'll just get started moving forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. We're excited to have Dan and Allison tonight from Mold Architects, who the board hired about a year ago now in last October to do a facility master plan study for the district. And as you can imagine, as they really got started in the spring, we had our COVID pandemic come and kind of really shift things a little bit in their process. Fortunately, one of the pieces that they do is just an evaluation of the physical space. You know, how many square feet, mechanical structures, those kinds of things that are happening in our schools. And so they completed most of that in the spring, as well as building team interviews with teachers and staff that work in the schools, which is what the board saw at their retreat, was a preliminary report with that piece. And now we're getting ready to move into the community engagement process and start to have broader conversations. And so Dan, I think, is going to talk tonight about what that looks like, how the board hopes to engage CAC members in some of these different focus group teams to gain a broader perspective, and to also talk about some of the priorities that will be included as part of the plan. So Dan, I think we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. It's great to see everybody tonight. Thanks for inviting Allison and I into the meeting. I think, did everybody see the schedule and the agenda sheet that we sent out? And keep that in mind that that's just a draft version. We wanted this group to weigh in and look at the timeline, look at the dates. Nothing set in stone. That was just a way to target dates of meeting, not only as a committee, but then eventually in focus groups, and then get back together and move into more of a long-range planning recommendation, which would be kind of the second tier of this. So I think it'd be easiest if I can share a screen with everybody. So hopefully you can see a schedule. This was the master schedule that we launched back in December of last year. And there had been some adjustments, as Dr. Pearson had mentioned, but in general, this is kind of the track we kept going forward to bring the information, the fact finding. This is really, the orange part of this chart is really dedicated to finding facts from a building conditions assessment, but also from educational alignment. And we presented the educational alignment more focused on that and capacity at the last board workshop. So what we're looking at tonight is really what starts in the blue and the green, working towards more of a broader input with the CAC and a long-range planning committee, as well as focus groups that'll be subgroups of that same committee, and then moving into a recommendation that would be targeted at March of next year. I'll show you. So for those that may not have seen this diagram, it simply shows our data collection is really at the top. We want to start with the facts and then move into a facility planning committee. And we start out as a full committee for at least a meeting, and I'll walk through the schedule here in a minute. But then we recommend breaking down to focus groups that really have a different charge. They have more, I guess, appealing to what their passions are, or where they see their interests. So they're talking about topics that are important to them. And we'd be taking that facility planning committee and basically breaking it down to three focus groups. One focused on learning spaces, and you can see the subsets within that. One focused on community space, and those subsets, and then one focus on physical conditions. And you can see the subsets there. So the learning space group would be really looking at the building equity, modernization, branding. How do the buildings align with program needs, not just now, but as we move forward? And then technology, as well as the alignment with the strategic vision. The district has a vision. The initiatives that they've launched, we want to make sure that the work that these committees do don't stray from that mission statement. From a community space standpoint, it's athletics and performances, community partnerships, and activities in communities. So it's the kind of non-organized things that access your buildings by outside community groups. And then the physical conditions side, again, the component of that would be capacity and enrollment, grade configuration, how the sites operate, the efficiency of the buildings, and also physical conditions, which the district has a very good handle on, as far as identifying what the next infrastructure or physical deficiencies that should be on the horizon. This would be talking more about the non-infrastructure components of that, but have a sense of what's on the horizon for expenses that the district may be looking at in the next 10 years for updating facilities. That does not the physical conditions group does not necessarily deal with the educational components or educational program alignment. That really stays in the learning spaces camp. So those groups would then get back together as a committee and identify what are the needs, what are we all trying to solve. So through the fact finding that we'll be reporting on and questions that come out of those subgroups, we'll continue to add information to their docket, but also with the goal of them expressing what are the needs that they feel are critical for the district to not only align with the mission, but solve as they move forward in planning. As a facility planning committee, then it's really important for that group to agree on those needs before we launch into, okay, how do we create a master plan that would be a recommendation to the board? We really need to have focus and consensus on those needs. What are we trying to fix? How are we moving forward? And then the second tier of this then is that from the needs statement to what kind of options do we have to solve those needs? And that would be the second part of that timeline. Any questions that the group might have so far? And some of them have seen this, some may not have.
Just some clarity around the language here. So the school board workshop, is the charge and outcome, is that something that the board has already written and worked on? Or talk a little bit about the work that was put into place to kind of come up with that charge and the outcome by the school board? So
this was a sample charge and outcome statement for the board's consideration. The board will be authoring their charge statement before the committee convenes as a whole. And that first meeting then would be, part of that dialogue would be to basically convey that the charge and the outcome, what it's expected of this committee as a whole moving forward.
That's great. And so that's a little more clarity. So this is just kind of the recommendation. This is what you guys have followed in the past. And then with regards to kind of the facility planning committee, or maybe some color where Dr. Pearson or the board feels, where does the CAC kind of fit into this exactly? Just so I can kind of get the common language here.
Well, my understanding is the discussion we've had so far is the CAC committee would be the foundation of the facility planning committee, and adding some stakeholders to fill in maybe where some representation is limited. One comment was maybe there's more educators that should be part of those groups, but that you're really the foundation of creating this facility planning committee. So we were targeting somewhere around 30 plus individuals. And then as you break that down to 3 groups, they don't always turn out to be equal focus groups, but the idea would be that there'd be 10 to 15 individuals in each focus group.
Thank you.
Now, if that's not completely in alignment with Dr. Pearson, the board members that are part of this, certainly chime in.
Now that was our understanding, and what the board had intended was CAC would be doing the bulk of work and all the way, and making a recommendation with it, with the possibility of additional people being added to it as well.
Thank you.
Does that cover the question? Well, no, thanks.
I just wanted to jump in. I think that sounds great. And I like the thought of the additional people being added and really thinking about the representation around the table, not just the professional and family representation, but I think it's also important to have diverse representation from across the community to really have full balance. And I know that once we get to that point, we'll have to discuss how we're going to bring in that representation or who will be brought in. I think that's an additional process that we as a group have to consider as well.
And I would certainly rely on the CAC to maybe be the voice of where you'd like to add to the group as a whole to cover some of the topics, diversity and geography and whatever stakeholders you feel should have voices at the table. So I'm going to jump, unless there's questions on the actual organization and the diagrammatic version of this, I'm going to jump to a calendar that the items we shared earlier today. And I'm a rookie at this sharing thing, so bear with me. So we came up with a calendar that I think gives a sense of the timeline and where other formalities or formal meetings take place. Starting on October here, and we've represented in the blue squares the board meeting dates. That's more just for acknowledgement. There are a couple of board milestone dates on this calendar. The orange hexagons are the business services committee meetings, and then the green circles are targeted dates for the facility planning committee and then the subgroups, those focus groups, to meet on. So right now, just to get things kickstarted, obviously we're at the first week of October. We're looking at the 22nd or 29th to really have a kickoff meeting of the full facility planning committee. And you can certainly tell us if that makes sense. We took this kind of working backwards from a March presentation of the board. There's a lot of different ways this can go from here. If you feel like there's more meetings needed, I will say that we're usually targeting with this group 10-ish meetings, usually get us from point A to point B before a recommendation. We're showing 9 right now. And they're about on a 2-week increment with a couple of exceptions. But with that kickoff meeting as a full facility planning committee, before we break into subgroups, we'd be looking at the end of this month. And then in November, looking for 2 dates, the 4th and the 5th and the 18th and 19th. And that's just to cover the 3 different groups. So we're trying to keep those on a pretty much same pace, even though one night would have a meeting for one group and the other night would have a meeting for 2 groups, or some combination of that based on availability. So we'd have a second meeting, the 4th and the 5th, a third on the 18th, 19th, continuing in early December, and then coming back together as a full facility planning committee on this 15th would be us putting together what are the needs that have been identified through these committee efforts to report to the board on January 11th. That would be, here's our findings and here's where we feel the needs are. And that would then also be the launching point to look at solutions or options to come up with a plan. And that would start after the 11th of January. So we would be looking at the 21st of January, the 4th and 11th of February, and the 4th of March to have those meetings to entertain different options or solutions to solve some of the needs that were identified, and then look at a recommendation to the board by March 8th. Any feedback on the calendar?
I have a
Timing,
question.
nights,
I just have a
availability
question.
of the team. Obviously, this is a pretty robust schedule and would require as much consistency as possible. We're bumping up to a couple of the holidays as well. So, and to have the same voices at the table in each of those, not only as a facility planning committee as a whole, but also in those subgroups, those focus groups, is really important, because we don't want to rewind each meeting and talk about what we talked about. We'll have to keep, so to speak, the ball moving forward. So if there's any feedback on that timing or the overall schedule, we'd love to hear from the group.
I just have one thing, Dan. October 29th is already scheduled for a parent university. We have a speaker coming that night, so that would not be something that we would like to schedule over.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. Appreciate the input.
I have a question. Are the facility planning committee meetings and focus group, are those public meetings, and do they have a published agenda for those meetings?
That's, I think, really up to the district. Other districts we've worked with have ran that both ways. They've had it an open meeting, but participants and are part of the facility planning committee are the only ones that could voice or participate as a whole, and certainly be the ones that are formulating a recommendation. Some districts choose to keep it a little more closed and just focus with that. Those planning committee and focus groups are the attendees for those meetings. So that's really a choice of the district. I think we've seen it operate both ways.
They will not be board meetings, committee meetings. Mrs. Barker and I are not to participate. So I know that is, that even though both of us would love to sit in on it, this is really a time for the community to talk without us being part of it. Is there any chance, are we thinking that some of these meetings will be virtual, Dan?
Well, a great question. Certainly it can be, especially since we're sharing information. Some of the things, just like we're doing tonight, could be done virtually. We do, depending on the size of the group, that gets a little more complicated. But if we're having an overall group of 30 to 35, if that's our target, I think that can be manageable in a virtual setting. We did, in talking with John Baird and from an operations standpoint, we did identify 3 spaces at Thompson, or at least 2 per night, if we needed to have 2 meetings to move from one to the other, that we could hold those smaller setting meetings and maintain social distancing. But it's really, I guess, up to the comfort of the committee and the district, if that's a viable option. Certainly, you tend to be able to cover things a little bit quicker on a live setting, but they're definitely manageable via virtual. As a matter of fact, our hand has been forced, obviously, but we've been running virtual meetings really since the pandemic hit, and we've found ways to make sure we're getting input and voices heard, and I think it can be done quite well from our experience.
The board did not talk about whether it would be streaming or whether we would open it up. I think in the pandemic, we would, if we opened it to the public, it would be very limited to who could be part or sit in. If it was streamed, they would, my assumption is they'd miss out on some pieces when you go into breakout rooms. Dr. Pearson, what's your thinking? The board hasn't talked about this.
Well, we did, there was some discussion about it at the retreat. If you remember, I think the intent of the focus group meetings was that they would not be public meetings for at least the focus group portion. You know, there's the people that are on those teams, you want them to be able to have open kind of conversations, which is one reason that board members are not going to attend those meetings. And just the way that focus groups function, You want people to be able to have some, frank discussions as a group. And so I think that was the intent of the focus group piece. There are other opportunities for community involvement and engagement other than just the focus groups. And so I think that was kind of the thinking initially.
Dr. Pearson, can you repeat the part where that you said there are other opportunities? Maybe just clarify that a little bit, because I think that was a focus of.
So I'm gonna let Dan talk about that, because you come back to community opportunities after the focus group portion. So Dan, do you want to talk about that piece?
Sure. So usually we try to build in an opportunity at when the needs are expressed. That's usually a common milestone when the focus groups reconvened as a facility planning committee and really found consensus on what they think the needs should be moving forward to develop solutions or a plan. And that's usually a good time to play that to the community, just so they understand where that checkpoint is in time, that this is what these committees or these focus groups have determined are important to the district to look to solve. And that also is a good launch point to go into the solutions dialogue or the plan dialogue. So we would probably build that in. I didn't anticipate a date for that, but it may make sense after the 11th, after the board hears it, to have that feedback loop with the community sometime in January. And then again, a second milestone would be as the recommendation comes to the board. And keep in mind, the recommendation of this group is just that. It's a recommendation for the board's consideration. And the board may have some comments and questions, and that feedback from the board to the facility planning committee may put them back into a meeting session or two that resolve some of those questions. And to have that open voice from the community as well may put the facility planning committee into kind of a second phase of re-looking at a couple options. So sometime in March or April, that may be a good target to have a second community outreach. And certainly the findings that are being identified in these sessions could be posted. We usually track this and have it available. So not just whether it's just committee access or a broader group of stakeholders can have access to the information that's being developed at the committee level. But those are the two milestones we find. The needs and then the solution or the plan are pretty good checkpoints.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Kelly. The first one was, I understood about the dates going back a little bit about like November 4th and 5th, 18th, 19th, so on and so forth, that you're thinking 3 different meetings over the span of 2 days, but they wouldn't be required that we go to both, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, it's based on availability, because I teach on Wednesday nights, so I just want to make sure. And then, because we usually meet on Tuesday, Thursdays in this group, so I wasn't sure how Wednesdays would play into everybody else's schedule either. The second thing was, would there be, I think you just hit on this about like a town hall meeting coming after February or after January, but I was curious if there could be a district-wide Carol FAQ type page where some questions are answered as they come up as needed throughout the committee meetings. And I don't know if it's too soon to put something like that forward, but I know that when, the past 6 months, the FAQ has been really awesome for us to take a look at. And having this be a hot topic right now, I don't know if you all feel it is, but I'm feeling it. I feel that if we had that information somewhere on our public D303 site that we could share with others, that some of those answers could be posted and accessed too, if it's not going to be a public or recorded forum. And then my last thing, a request would be, as a CAC member and on the exec team, and I know my fellow exec members feel this as well, we feel that we need to bring it to the community. So how would the district feel about some exec team members doing some coffee talks or something like that as this process goes forward? just to get our area feedback or anything like that. And I know it hasn't really been discussed yet, but I'm just curious as to, getting other, voices heard and just having that available. No.
So I do think that, I think those are good ideas as far as, kind of bringing in different area voices. The CAC, actually, I know that there may be a concern that it's not representative. It is actually fairly representative of a number of different areas. So I do think that might be something to consider. As well as, those specific points that Dan mentioned in January and in March, where we would then, go out for a larger conversation.
I think the board agree that we want to be as transparent. We're not trying to hide anything about it. The work, I would make this suggestion that you go through the first big meeting and maybe start the focus groups and see what you think needs to happen. Because going to coffees and having to explain, you'd have to have, it just could get confusing. I don't know, maybe it would work fine. I think you'll figure it out as you go along. What you and when you need to broaden whose voices you hear. I like the idea of having two times. It may very well be that the second one may be school by school by school. We don't know what you're going to recommend. We don't know what the board is going to decide. We know there's no intention here of a referendum. There's no set idea of what we're going to spend in the next 10 years. This is just the beginning of a process to give us a vision. So I think it'll kind of evolve. The board is asked to get updates very regularly so that we can also have a sense of what work you're doing and what you're thinking, and as well as to add anything that we feel is needed. So my sense, I'm wondering if we did, if we streamed the first big CAC meeting so everybody could see that would be open to the public to just be able to see what the meeting is, and then wait until you've done your work to see where you want to go, and then or run it by the board to see if the board is okay with CAC doing it. That's my thought at this point.
I'm curious if any other exec members have an opinion, something that was said earlier regarding that if any of these meetings are made public, that would, my words, minimize kind of the open dialogue. I'm not sure that I understand that perspective exactly, or I feel the same way. And I'm just curious if any other exec team members agree with that or feel the contrary, I guess.
Can you say a little bit more about that, Garrett?
Yeah, I apologize. I think it was just more of a theme, or I don't know if Dr. Pearson said it, or earlier they were kind of discussing, the group was discussing that, making these a more private meeting, being the committee meeting and the focus groups, would allow for, I guess, a safer space for facility committee to kind of share and just be more open, versus if it's public, and please correct me if I misunderstood this, but if it's public, that they may not feel as comfortable with kind of just sharing in an open environment. And I'm just trying to kind of build on that thought and see if that is a similar theme that kind of the rest of the CAC exec team is feeling. Do you feel your colleagues on the bigger CAC or the facilities planning committee would feel uncomfortable sharing in a public setting? I guess is the root question.
Y'all know that I don't have any problem sharing my thoughts and feelings.
I think everybody on this group, but I'm curious if you have a barometer on the larger CAC.
Yeah,
if you feel that.
I really don't. I think we knew coming in on the CAC that everything was going to be open and some recorded and most recorded. So I don't see as the CAC members feeling that that's a problem, but I don't know if it's logistical with the pandemic and having it open is what they were thinking on that. In that, you know, if there's 15 people plus some facilitators, that could quite a large group. And I'm still concerned about this pandemic. So for me, it would be better to have a smaller closed group. And I wouldn't mind if it was recorded and shared or streamed or any of that. But I feel that there's several reasons as to why I could see somebody would want it to be a closed group, so that it was focused and right there and not too many outside energies pushing it into one direction. And I could see that possibly happening on some of the hotter topics. But I don't have any problem with it being open. I just think there's other reasons as to behind why that makes sense to me.
I kind of straddle between both. I came into the CAC understanding that this was really to gain the greater consensus of the community. I think it's really important to have broader community voice funneled through, you know, us as liaisons, really bringing that voice back to the table and sorting through what the key themes that we're hearing out in the community is. I do a lot of community summits to just gather input across the state. And I think that there are ways that could be done, and not oversaturation, but at least we have to gather some input so that when there are decisions made, people feel that and it's not just feel, they can hear and see where their comments and their feedback is represented in the greater decisions. I think that is a hallmark of community collaboration and community systems development. That being said, yes, logistics are always a key component, but even if it were summits that were something of just a fact presenting, you know, basic, here are the facts, here's what's happening so far, just give public reaction, we take notes, and then it's just, you know, a public forum of reactions to be able to then take back and, you know, identify the themes, what's floating to the top, what are some major issues. And that would really be the job of the CAC to then discuss at that point of what was brought to the table, what was discussed. But I think I feel like I'm on that same page, Garrett, as far as community voice. But yes, it can be done in a way that is structured, and it can be virtual. And I know that can be hard to reach all families that may not necessarily have access to that. So we may want to put out a survey with the FAQ in multiple languages. We may want to put out 2 dates for community summits or something to that effect, just to gather feedback. And I guess that's my 2 cents there.
I have 2 thoughts. First of all, can we clarify the focus groups? It's my understanding from the last board meeting that we are not members of all of the focus groups, that the entire CAC will make some choices about what focus group they would like to be in. Am I correct about that, Dan?
That's correct. Yep.
And then my second thought is, do we have any flexibility in this calendar so we could do it, perhaps those inputs, meetings or presentations or fact gathering or thought gathering from the community? I'm going to go back to something Becky said about, I don't know that we will know what we need until we get into the meat of some of this. And I think we do represent, the CAC was set up to have a representation of across the board. I'm not saying we don't want input at all. I think that's going to be very important. So is there flexibility that if we get to a point where we say, you know what, we really need to see what our community is thinking about this, can we fit it in there?
I would say yes. I mean, the overall schedule is ambitious. So fitting in a public forum, we would just have to see it. You kind of want to hit a sweet spot, I guess, is making sure that that information or the feedback from the community dovetails into the facility planning committee process. So we don't get too far down getting information delivered to that group, and they're pondering what's important and what the needs are, and then bring the community in and find out that maybe there's some things that weren't on the table. So I think that usually when the facts are kind of on the facility planning committee's table and they're starting to get their arms around what are our true needs in this district, that somewhere is a good checkpoint to make sure that filters with the community, that makes sense to a larger community forum. So I think sometime in January would be a good target for that. You can certainly do them sooner and more often. That's really up to the committee and the district's choice, I guess, if there's a reason to bring in a larger group. I would say that, talking about your earlier conversation about what's the openness of these meetings, there is a little bit of a logistical issue is just having somebody along for the entire process. If they're not part of meeting 2, meeting 3, and show up meeting 4, they're going to be chiming in on information that maybe has already been discussed and vetted and kind of passed. So I think you have to be strategic about when and how you invite a larger group into the conversation. But
and Dan, I really appreciate that too, because I think you're exactly right as far as people chiming in the middle. But let me just kind of concretely say this. So if the facilities planning committee is once a month, then that's going to be in lieu of the CAC meeting. Am I right in saying that? So why not make that one just like this, whether it's virtual or in person, it's recorded, and then people have an opportunity to make comments, record comments beforehand, and they may be totally out of line, to your point, because they haven't listened to the previous meeting, and everybody knows that on the call because they haven't educated themselves. But we still kind of track and understand their perspective and their feedback. And then the focus group meetings are private. So that's kind of how, when I see this agenda, how I'm thinking about it in a way to communicate. I do also agree, Kelly, on the FAQ. I think it's really helpful. It's been helpful. The other FAQs have been helpful. So when we think about kind of that feedback loop into the system and out of the system, that just provides us kind of a foundation to go back and reference, because we can't remember every single item. But I think those should be pulled and uploaded from either the facility planning committee meetings, or maybe something came up from a focus group that we want to include on those FAQs. But that's just structurally how I was thinking about this as you presented it, Dan, and I'm curious if anybody else has thoughts on that.
So Dan, so I make sure I'm clear, there's focus group and then the big group are meeting. Each focus group will meet once a month and the whole group will meet once a month. Is that accurate?
Actually, the full group, the facility planning committee, and that's just the terminology we've been using, that group would meet once at the beginning, and that right now that's targeted for end of the month. That would be basically kind of an information dump. The things we've found and conveyed to the board would be available to that group. It'd also be a place to help them understand how the process moves forward with focus groups and allows them to select. And I think even ahead of time, if the CAC has some interests or passions, that start to divide that group up ahead of time in focus groups. But they would meet that first meeting, and then for the next 3 meetings, it would be strictly focus groups. So as you get into November and early December, the focus groups would splay off of that group, focus on the topics under their realm, and then get back together. Right now, on this calendar be the 15th of December, just to kind of put a ribbon around, here's the needs we found, cross-check with the entire group. There may be some common ground. And we'll also be a spokesperson as part of each of these focus group meetings to say, that's something that the other group's talking about too. Maybe there's some synergy or some feedback loop that we can share. But on the 15th, then you would reconvene in preparation to put together just a needs recommendation or needs of findings to the board on the 11th.
Would it be,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
oh, I was just gonna say, would it be reasonable then to expect the CAC to meet in between there before the big meeting at the end? The exec team anyways?
Oh,
Or-
sure. Mhm.
Well, the reason I'm asking is to kind of pull it all together, and I don't know,
Right.
I just,
So from
wanna
this point, Mrs. McCabe and I do need to talk about where we're going to have exec meetings. I don't think it's fair to ask the entire CAC to continue to meet outside of these meetings, but the exec team should continue to meet. And so that's another place that we can discuss adding on some of those additional pieces that, you know, we're talking about getting voice and bringing some of that back then to the focus groups and the planning committee
And the board.
and ultimately the board.
Right. I personally like the idea that the large group could be streamed. The focus groups, I think they're more working committees, and they should, I just think it would be harder if it's streamed for the conversation, but that's, I also wonder, Dan, when do we bring the teachers in? I know you said after January, but we're really talking about their workspace. And community folks could have a completely different vision from what a teacher or staff member might. So when do we hear their voices?
Well, part of the educational alignment evaluation was focused on making sure we had voices at the table speaking on their behalf. So those building leadership teams had a great cross representation of each school, and they were expressing the things that were important in their building that could better support what they were delivering, the curriculum and learning environments. We feel like that was a good chance to hear those voices. Certainly at these checkpoints, if you're going to have an outreach to a broader group, they would be welcome to join that. And any time after that, when we're talking about solutions, we're not necessarily talking about a specific space getting a specific thing. We're talking about, here's the plan going forward with consistency and equity and all the important initiatives that are being talked about, that we're covering those as an umbrella statement. When we get in front of implementing a plan, once the board and the community have found this to be an acceptable course of action from a master planning standpoint, there'd still be a whole nother layer of that input from the educator and final users of spaces talking about the exact needs of a space. But I think at least we got a first good blush from those educators and building representatives to understand what their priorities were for each building. There's a little bit of, so the learning space committee would be probably on point to either bring some folks in to speak to that group as a resource and say, this is what's happening in this level of education, and have a spokesperson. That's very typical, is when we get in those focus group meetings, is the first meeting as a focus group to have a spokesperson from the district that's talking about direction of learning or the vision of learning in the district. So you're kind of hearing the broader thread that that group can respond to as they discuss specific needs.
So
I hope that answers your question, Ms. McCabe, but that's how we think of it.
So I've had a bit of experience with this. I read the interview booklet. Will the CAC get the interview books?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so when you read that, and I went through it today, it has been my experience that teachers and administrators tend to not think outside of the work they're already doing when it comes to facilities. So you see that we don't have enough storage. Our furniture needs to be upgraded. We just redid the library, and my wonderings are, will the focus groups be doing a little bit of dreaming when we're talking about the future? And I would want to have the opportunity for teachers and principals to be part of those dreaming discussions. And that's me. We didn't talk about it at the board level, but I'm just wondering how we get the vision part built, and not that, oh, well, we need more storage or we need new chairs, because we're talking about a 10-year look at where education is going and how do our facilities meet that vision. And I can imagine that maybe Dr. Pearson is not happy that I say that, but I'm thinking that maybe we need to consider that addition to the CAC work.
I think also, I think we need, I don't know how you lead them to have that kind of a future focus. People are in a right now focus. And that's just everybody, I think. But I'm wondering how does that, how do you do that? What's the process you might use?
Well, one tool we've done and really applies to learning spaces specifically is show that group what else is being done in other districts or neighboring districts, or for specific purpose, extending learning environments or blended learning, and how other districts are reacting or responding to that. So we can show some virtual tours, so to speak, of spaces and philosophies that other districts might be entertaining. I think it would be valuable to have somebody from the district speak to that group, though, too, on what the more tangible vision is for learning in the district, because I think that would umbrella what a lot of the teachers are thinking and talking about, even though they're maybe have a little bit more of a focus zoomed in, so to speak. But if they could step back and understand what's the future of learning in their building, there really wants to be an umbrella vision for all of that learning spaces focus group is working as a backbone. And so I'm not sure I answered your question, Ms. McCabe, on the how do you bring educators in for another round of that higher level thinking. But if there's spokespersons that could talk to the learning spaces group that represent that, I think that would be a great start. I'm not sure how diverse all those educator visions are, or if it is kind of packed into a single or kind of more of a uniform sightline.
Am I correct that you met with educators in the spring and got some feedback?
Yeah, we started with the principals, walked the buildings, and had identified what spaces and how they're using the building, because that was important for the capacity side, but also what spaces are supporting curriculum and what spaces are not supporting operations and function and curriculum, and any other future initiatives as Empower is being launched, as for an example. And so we had that feedback, and then we had a second meeting with the building leadership team along with the principal that basically vetted that information and kind of added context to it. So in the effort to say, how would your building function better now in the future? What are your needs? So that was the the goal of those building leadership teams. And I will say there is comments of, I need more storage for this individual. There are a little bit broader looks at space too, but I think in that level of detail in concert with a district vision for curriculum and what's the goal would be a great stepping off point for that learning spaces committee.
So is it possible to add teachers to these focus groups? I mean, I know I'm getting further ahead, and I know I'm being nitty gritty when I say like a whiteboard that went from floor to ceiling was looked upon quite ridiculous because no one was that tall. Or when teacher workspaces or desks were taken away. I mean, I think you ask the rank and file because they're the ones that are living and breathing it. And maybe they don't have a big enough dream, but hopefully what you can show us as, wow, did you realize this was even possible, or other schools are doing this, can broaden that dream. But I fear that, as Becky said, this is their workspace.
I think it worked well over the summer too on those task force meetings that we had, and you had a good sampling with principals and teachers involved from all different grade levels. And I think they can bring some extra feedback. And I don't know, I can say this, I don't know what has already been done other than what you're telling us, Dan, but I think it might not be a bad idea to try to get one or two of the sample on each of those three groups. I agree with Pat. But again, if you have another plan for that, then that's fine too. So
I think that was the one thing that we identified as a supplement to the CAC, as this CAC turns into the facility planning committee, is to have some educator voices sitting at the table as part of that.
I've got kind of a general question that drills down, I guess, a little bit more specific. Dan, at what juncture, I guess, in this kind of draft agenda, do we or the community, and maybe it's not even the facilities planning that necessarily hears about this to process it, but I got to think that you're going to be sharing some data around the functionality of facilities from the standpoint of age, size of classroom, equity across the entire district, where some classrooms are smaller, et cetera, that are just larger conversations than the budget that we're dealing with right now. And to Ms. McCabe's point earlier, I think the visioning and thinking about that's the fun stuff. But I got to think that there's going to be some painful conversations coming up through this process about either equity across the district from what we're offering students, from physical space, to either if kids are getting moved, I don't know what that looks like, but I'm curious kind of in this timeline, if that is brought up to the facility planning committee, or is it brought up to the board, et cetera?
Yeah, so the information or the metrics you're talking about to give some objective data to support inequities or classroom size or core planning, core space sizing, cafeteria, gymnasium, media centers, that information is in our educational alignment evaluation. So there are metrics in there identifying which schools have classes that are falling below certain space levels that may be detrimental to teaching those kids. So that information would be part of the learning spaces first layer of fact finding that we would share and we found. Certainly there's a subjective side of that too, but we always start with as much objective data as we can. And if we get questions back, well, what about this? What about this? We usually will reach out to district and building specific administrators if need be to gain some more input on maybe things that we didn't turn over the stones on. So I think there's definitely objective data that helps show where equity might be a challenge between buildings or within a building. But that in each group would have a different level of that. For instance, the community space group would have more of athletic space, performance space. Some of those things that they're talking about are the high schools equitable side by side, or do we have needs that from a community demand standpoint that are falling shy. We keep adding data to that conversation as those questions come up.
So that data dump is going to go to one of those focus groups. Am I
Correct.
saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
The first meeting would start with a broad, basic data dump to our findings to date, but we wouldn't get in the weeds too much at that level because each group is going to can chew on more detail as we meet with them in their subgroup settings.
Thank you.
I don't know if we answered the question about this educator involvement. If there's some thoughts on how to bring in, other than adding some of those members to the CAC or to the facility planning committee, are there other thoughts on how to reach out to them and gain more of their vision?
Well, I think what I would suggest is that we have a board meeting next week, and that maybe Mrs. Barker and I get an agenda item. I think it's still okay for us to do that, to just unpack this a little bit more. I'm a little concerned about the aggressive timeline, and maybe we need to think that through. I really want to do this well. I have been on, and I talked about this at the board meeting. I have been on all different levels of facilities throughout my career, including being a principal who had a complete remodel of a building, but also a parent who did 6 months of work with a team, and the board threw away our plan when we handed it to them. And I don't want to waste anybody's time because that's very frustrating. So I think we may need a little more board direction about how to bring the community in a little more, as well as how to be sure the teachers and the educator voices are heard. I think there are so many, this is such a layered experience. The facilities is just one piece of the educational work. And I want us to have a really good document for future boards and our community, because I think it will make a difference who moves here. And again, there are children who are not born yet who will be impacted by what we do in this thing. So if the exec team is okay with us, and Mrs. Barker, if you're okay with us moving this to the board table to do a little more discussion about it, and then just let's get the big meeting going, so you can get on people's calendars, and then we'll see how. I think we're going to have some flexibility so that as you begin to unpack the work, you go, whoa, 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 we got to be able to do this. And I think the board has to hear that voice, so that we're not so locked in that we miss opportunities. Anyway, that's my thought. Mrs. Barker, what do you think?
Well, I think there's two things. I think that yes, once the groups begin to get going, they may find they do need more meeting time. I do want to be fair to people, though. To say we're going to add 2 more months of this could be a lot for some people. So I want to be cognizant of that. We're asking people to attend these meetings and make sure that they're there, because we want to have the same people saying this, hearing the same thing in the same groups. But then also, if it goes on, several more months, my concern is that we won't have that continuity with the people and getting the information. I do think that once you get through a cycle of, you get your October and November, and then you're back at a facilities, like the full meeting, that meeting 5, I think you may know, are you going to be ready to present the findings at that point? And maybe that's when you can make an adjustment. But I feel like they need to get started to see before we can make any determination. I think that's going to be important to have our exec meetings at strategic points after focus group meetings and or facilities planning meetings.
I think that's a fair way to approach it, because we don't know all the questions that may come up, that we need to do some more research or bring in another voice from the district or the community to speak to an item that may be a really hot topic for a focus group that isn't necessarily on our radar right now. So I think that would give some latitude for that to happen. I agree, if we can charge, at least get the launching point, get the facility planning committee the data that we know now, and then get them kicked off into these focus groups, I think we'll start to get a feel of where their questions lie, and are they deeper discussions than we have the information for. This is 2 weeks enough to gather everything, come back and keep them rolling. So I think those questions we'll probably know within a couple meetings, maybe the third meeting of the focus group, where some of those questions might lie. That would be a good check-in point to say, I think we're going to have to add a meeting or two, get into January, maybe February is the first playback on the needs findings to the board. I'm not suggesting that needs to move. I'm just saying that it'd be to have some latitude to make sure we cover the bases would be wise.
So exec team, are you ready to schedule the first meeting? Let's get that on the calendar and get that moving.
And one caveat to initializing that meeting or memorializing that meeting is any other committee members that you want to add to this discussion, whether they're educators or some other stakeholders that aren't part of your core CAC, will they be able to meet this calendar and this needs? I think there's a discussion of who might those people be, and are they available, and does the date work for them too? Because you really want to have that first meeting be a broad kickoff with everybody at the table. And we can certainly move the 22nd and 29th, we're just targeting Thursdays. It seems like Thursdays were a day that most people have open. There's not other meetings going on. Wednesdays, I know there's some conflict occasionally with some religious classes and things like that. Tuesdays is available too. If we want to look at, if the 29th doesn't work and the 22nd is too quick, we're not held to Thursdays. Just wanted to offer that up as another avenue.
I'm good with Thursdays, and I don't mind the rigorous schedule either. I found that it was really exciting in the summer when we had the task force by Dr. Pearson, and we met every week, and we got stuff done and things happened, and it felt like you were really part of something. So I feel that this will be similar to that. So every other week is fine. I'm only available on Thursdays, so that's my personal choice. When you say facility planning committee meeting number 1, it's basically CAC of the whole is what we call it, right, guys? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then any extra people that we add to that, just to clarify. Okay. And I don't think 2 weeks from now is too unreasonable, because the CAC as a whole usually meets about once a month. So I'm good with it. Anybody else?
I'm fine. I say, let's go.
I'm fine with it too. I would
I'm
just
good.
wonder what the communication plan is, if we're looping in anybody else. And I think Dan already mentioned that. If we're bringing anybody else in addition on that first meeting.
Well, I think we'll have to talk to I'd like to talk to Dr. Pearson about how that would work, as well as to the board. So if you would let Mrs. Barker and I take care of that, I would rather you guys get going, and we'll see how we can, what we need to do for adding any other folks.
Also, how are the with the exec team, how are we going to be split into those 3 committees? You're just going to
Darn.
assign us, or do we?
No, it's important that you're following interests. So if somebody's really driven towards the learning environments and learning spaces, I would suggest that that's the direction they choose. If somebody's more interested in how the community sees and uses the buildings, that would be a better fit for a focus group. We don't necessarily have to decide that. We can decide that at the first meeting and kind of describe what's under each umbrella and let people choose. That really sounds interesting to me. I'm going to sign up for that and kind of do a live sign up at that first meeting. If you have a hunch, certainly bring that to the table. What we don't want is 3 people in the physical conditions group and everybody else in the other 2. And speaking from experience, sometimes that happens a little bit.
So are the 3 learning environment, community use, and physical conditions? Those are the
Correct.
3?
Yep.
Okay.
And we'll have district representation. I know Mr. Baird will be part of the physical conditions group as a resource, just as we will be. And then also, I think he would like to sit in the community use group because he has a wealth of understanding of how those buildings are being used, not just day to day, but also evenings and some of that information. And we'll bring in other folks that can talk to the questions that get brought up by that focus group or every focus group.
Have we decided whether these focus groups are in person or virtual? Being as they're going to be smaller than.
Yeah, I think that is up for discussion. We're comfortable doing it either way. And if some are more comfortable being live and some are more comfortable being virtual, we can do that too. It doesn't have to be a one size fit all.
So maybe a decision that's made on whatever the 22nd or whatever day that first meeting is. Okay.
I think we should ask the committee members what their preference is. I think with these smaller groups, we could facilitate a in-person meeting in a larger space. And I do think, I mean, I don't know how you feel, Dan, but I feel like probably the conversation is better if people are in person.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a higher level of engagement in what's going on. So if we can offer it, great. If people are not comfortable doing that, then we can figure out a different way to offer it.
Yeah, I think it's a great starting point. It sounds like that kickoff meeting is going to be virtual just because of the size of the group. We can get a flavor of how people feel comfortable moving forward from there. But I would agree, Dr. Pearson, having a live meeting is, you can see where people are engaged and focused and puzzled, and it's just a better setting.
I think I'm very proud of the choices that we've given to families through the pandemic. I hate to eliminate someone because they are not safe going face to face. So I would agree with Dr. Pearson if we can give people choices and figure out how to accommodate. That would be my preference.
Okay.
All right. So we're looking at October 22nd at 6:30. Mrs. Smith, can you get that out to folks?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And then is there anything else? And Mrs. Barker, you can take over.
I didn't,
So-
sorry, I didn't pull up the other agenda screen. I think you all received it. That's just showing the concept of what an agenda for each meeting was. It was obviously that'll twist and turn a little bit as comments and feedback come up from those subgroups. But that first meeting, even if the times, those times are really just something we targeted. We know that first meeting is going to be a little longer. We're going to pass on most of the information that the board received at the workshop. So it's going to be a big fact finding, I guess, dump at the first meeting, and then talk about the focus group roles.
And we're going to have that book as well that Mrs. McCabe had
Yeah, I
said.
think what we'll do is we'll figure out a way to pass that on electronically. I think it'd be And unless people think a hard copy is better.
No, electronically is fine. Just give us time to read it.
Okay.
If that first meeting is indeed going to be longer, change the time on here so people are aware. I'd rather say it's longer and have it end earlier than have clock watcher.
Our meetings
Yeah.
typically start at 6, so I would start it at 6. And I was looking at the 5:45 meetings. Does anyone think is it too early, you think, for people to be able to get to the, because if those are in person, then you're actually physically getting there.
Yeah.
Well, but I think if you allow for people to choose, then they have the ability to either call in if they can't physically be there, or they can attend in person. So as long as there's choice, that's the start time is, sort of rather irrelevant.
Is there any thing in the documents that if would be a security risk? Is there anything we need to consider?
Yeah, so we have to be careful with the actual physical plant maps of our schools. We shouldn't be putting that out in a public forum. I think people can look at them for conversations, but as far as I would be very concerned about posting that electronically. That's just, not something that we typically make available in that format.
Okay. Is there a way to showcase, would that put a limitation on sharing that document that the board received?
I think we need to talk with our security team just to figure out what the best way to do that is.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's value, and I also think, Dan, from your perspective, what it is you're wanting to share for as far as the group talking about some of those pieces. Do we use some maps? Do we use? We just need to figure out from your presentation what you want to talk about. Okay. I think for the board presentation, you shared two different. You shared a high school example and an elementary example.
Yeah.
And so I think we should figure out what we want to share. And I don't have any problem with CAC members seeing the actual maps and all of that. I don't want it to be available in a public forum where we don't know who's seeing it or how it's being used.
Fair enough. Okay. Okay.
If the CAC people can get it without it being posted, that would be nice. Also, Dan and Dr. Pearson, if people want to visit the buildings from CAC, I know that was a conversation that we had at the board table. And I know that with COVID, that gets more complicated. But that's something at that big meeting you'll want to talk about because not all of our folks have been in any school building. And I would assume that not everybody has been in every building. So they may want to see buildings that they have never been in.
We find that to be a common request, especially, for instance, the learning spaces might be familiar with the high school, but not having children at the earlier levels, the younger age levels, they might want to go see what a classroom looks like or what a classroom from 15 years or 20 years ago looked like compared to a 40-year-old environment space. So those are requests we typically get. It's not uncommon to have one of those focus group meetings actually serve as a tour.
All right, is there anything else that we need to cover? All right.
Thank you for all your input.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, members, for joining us tonight. Thank you for all the work.
Thank you all.
Are we adjourning the meeting?
I think Mrs. Barker's going to adjourn the meeting. Yeah.
Jill, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
All right, good. Now you can hear me. So our future agenda items are facilities for the foreseeable future. We'll adjourn this meeting at 7:21.